top news stories, which should be showing on the screen at the moment. Let's start with Dr. Tony Smith, Strategy Advisor, PLLMP. Which news headlines caught your eye today, please?
Well, the piece that took me was the emerging technologies and the perceived wisdom that autothermal reforming will form the basis of the blue hydrogen technology play, which will be a part of the journey to green. And so the story which took my eye was the Shell technology, which proposes that 22% cost reductions and increases in efficiency of carbon dioxide. So that's the one that took my eye.
It's interesting because that story is starting to really give firm parameters to a market of which there's a lot of buzz around at the moment, and it's one of those goalposts or potential goalposts that's been set in the sand to really make these blueprints and this excitement about hydrogen in the Middle East much more of a reality. Next up, please may I ask Charlie Rattan, our hydrogen business advisor, what grabbed your attention from the list?
Yeah, I saw one from the United Arab Emirates, Michelle. It says why hydrogen is the fuel of the future. And I suppose that just made me think how the energy transition is gaining traction, really, that almost a country so central to the oil and gas industry. It's not saying that oil and gas is the fuel of the future, but it's highlighting hydrogen as the fuel of the future. So I suppose it's almost like one of those things that makes you blink and think, is that really being said? Is it being said in black and white? That the Middle East, as this seminar shows, is now starting to recognise that the energy transition isn't tomorrow; it's perhaps now, and that a country, the UAE, says what it says there, almost on the tin. Why hydrogen is the fuel of the future? It's not me saying it; it's the United Arab Emirates. So that makes you blink and look twice at such a remarkable statement.
And also that they're saying that about a market, as we've just touched upon, that is still quite embryonic, really. They're not saying it about solar or more of the other more established renewable markets that have been gaining prominence in the region for the last 5 to 10 years. That they've gone for truly a futuristic market, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. Here in the UK, there's a debate last year this time, fracking, that nobody ever mentions it now. It's almost like one of these things that doesn't exist. It's been written out of history, and there we are. As you say, it's what is being said, and it's also what's not being said. That's just as important.
Dr. Pawelek, Research, Innovation and Funding Manager at Hydrogen Europe, thank you very much for joining us. What do you think we should all be reading from that list?
Well, from my side, the biggest news is actually the fact that, not directly related to hydrogen, but the fact that Biden picked Kerry as his climate coordinator. We know that the US is still a big player, and they've been lagging behind a bit lately in the climate effort, let's say. And I do hope that this is a big signal that this is about to change, and if the US joins the race to actually go fast and strong to climate mitigation, and then hydrogen, well, I hope we all know that hydrogen is indispensable to go for full decarbonization, and then we really do hope that the US can really push forward to the development of those technologies. And for me, this is the biggest news out of those listed.
And just touching on the US there, the feeling very much seems to be in the majority that when Biden walks into the office on the 20th of January and takes his seat at the table that we are all so familiar with, visually anyway, that signing the Paris Agreement will be one of the top things on his list, and then net zero commitments will follow thereafter, albeit allowing some political back and forth later this year, perhaps. What is your view? How quickly do you think that's going to happen?
Want me to go first?
Yeah, please.
Sure. So I think it's I'm going to be a bit controversial. It's perhaps less about the Paris Agreement. It's more about the Glasgow Agreement. Glasgow in COP26 is going to be this time next year, almost to the day. And at that point, I think that's the seminal moment where nations across the globe, at least in principle, start to reshape. But I think we have to just bear in mind, and a kind of note of caution, that hydrogen is one of the radically important energy vectors of a new energy system. But it isn't just hydrogen. We have to talk in the whole about an energy ecosystem where electrons and molecules play with each other, and molecules get transferred to other molecules. So hydrogen, ammonia, solar, they're all part of the same ecosystem. And indeed, we're already seeing scale investments in the Middle East. So the Nuon project, for example, is an example of just how this is playing out in real life, but it's part of a system. And let's be sure always to recognize markets need supply side and demand side in the whole, and often with very different demand cycles through the year. The Middle East demand in terms of principle is very different from the UK's demand, where demand is for heat is 5 times higher in the winter than summer. So very much an ecosystem.
I think really that leads us on to the next point in terms of what the Middle East can do in the next 12 months to really make a difference on the hydrogen side of this. A report by Bank of America Global Research, hydrogen could supply our energy needs, fuel our cars, heat our homes, and help fight climate change, all while generating $2.5 trillion of direct investment, $11 trillion of indirect infrastructure by 2050. These are reassuring numbers at a time when headlines are showing us how much the energy transition is going to cost, up to $30 trillion by 2050. And of course, the cost of not acting and letting climate remain unmitigated is even greater. We don't even have a number for the social and economic cost of doing nothing. So to get some feedback from one market such as hydrogen is quite reassuring in the economic climate at the moment. But Dr. Pawlak, how to unlock the potential of green hydrogen in the Middle East so that it can get a slice of this pie in the next 12 months? How to turn talk into action?
Yeah, so certainly Middle East is shaping as one of the regions where it's going to be the cheapest around the world to produce green hydrogen. The countries like Saudi Arabia, you have great solar irradiation, you have wind blowing basically the whole 24 hours almost constantly. So you have really perfect conditions to produce really cheap green hydrogen. And Europe will never be able to match that. There are some places like southern Spain, for example, Portugal, where it's possible, but it's just not possible to supply the whole of Europe with that hydrogen just from those limited places. So there, the likes of the Middle East is looking at being a potential exporter of energy. As it is today with oil, it can be also an exporter of clean energy in the form of hydrogen. You just need, I mean, of course, the shipping of hydrogen would be more costly than it is with natural gas, for example, per unit of energy because of energy density of hydrogen. But if you can do it below, let's say, $1.5, $1.7 per kilogram, which should be possible with liquid hydrogen, you can easily, even adding up to the cost of production in Saudi Arabia, end up with a cost of hydrogen landed in Europe below of what's possible to produce it locally in Europe. So,
but how soon can we get it? How soon can we start getting it to those competitive levels? What kind of timeline are we thinking about? Because, like I say, in the Middle East, the rhetoric is there, the excitement is there. You know, as we've already touched on, the headlines are very bold headlines saying, you know, hydrogen is the future. But how quickly is it going to be until it's an affordable measure that can actually start putting it as part of the overall package? Sorry, just for Dr. Pawlak, if you could give me an idea of how long you think that will be.
Well, that won't probably be the next 12 months, as you said. That would take a bit longer than that. But it's not a question of technology, really. It's a question of upscaling. So it wouldn't be a problem now to really upscale the production and to produce green hydrogen cheaply in the Middle East. The problem is, if you do it on a really big scale that you can drive the cost down, you don't have the demand for it at that scale yet. So we need to have not only mobility, we also need steel plants using hydrogen as feedstock instead of coal. You need ammonia plants using green hydrogen instead of gray hydrogen. So this will obviously take time to upscale the demand for hydrogen. And if that happens, you can very easily produce it even with today's technology and get at those low level prices. That's not a question of time in terms of the production side. The time is really on the end use side to upscale the demand for hydrogen to the levels that make it possible to produce cheap.
On that level, do you think that 2021 will primarily, Dr. Pawlak, do you think it will primarily be an education process? It can be a teaching session basically for 2021 on what we need to do for hydrogen, forming roadmaps, getting knowledgeable committees together?
Yeah, that's obviously still very important to get everyone on the same page, because the hydrogen is, it's notorious for the fact that the hydrogen projects are usually very complicated. You need because you don't have the infrastructure, so you need the people that build the infrastructure on your side of the project. You need the hydrogen production, you need the end user, so you get a very complicated project with multiple actors. So obviously you first need to, let's say, align the roadmaps of all those actors. They have the similar plans with similar scale deployed at the similar time. So this obviously takes time, this kind of coordination of effort and education, as you say, that's important. But to be honest, if you just do this now, you risk of falling behind a bit. So education is important, but you need to start also with the pilot projects, demo projects at a smaller scale to not only, let's say, educate yourself on paper and theoretically, but also get know-how of how it actually works and how to operate those projects.
So 2021 will be a year of education and starting pilot projects to actually see tangible benefit. Charlie, what steps do you think industry, government and academia must take in the Middle East to make this progress viable? As Dr. Pawlak has already touched upon, it's not going to be easy. It is a complicated market, even if it is bursting with potential. And it obviously needs to be a group effort. So what do you think is needed in the next 12 months?
Yeah, I think you'd look at the regulations as a starter, Michelle, and just check they're fit for purpose. I think we in the UK might still have regs that say only 0.1% of hydrogen can go into the gas network, which obviously is not very fit for the future. So then you might want to think about clustering principles, which are help drive the costs down. Both speakers have talked about ecosystems and exports. I think Germany might provide a useful early market for some of the exports. Certainly from the Middle East, you'd be looking to export. And I've seen a lot of talk about green hydrogen as well, going straight for green right from the outset. So Germany, I think, would be a good market, and the European hydrogen strategy is aligned with that. So you might want to think 1, regs, 2, clusters, and then 3, scalability. Both speakers have talked about it's expensive, it's not going to be cheap. Who pays is going to be an argument. But perhaps you can bring the cost down by ramping up. I think there are 50 or so major projects out there. So let's see the shovels go in the ground and those get away, and then whether that scale can drive down the cost, which is good news for everybody.
Because we're touching on collaboration here, and arguably that's ever more important after this year. The financial concerns that will be coming through next year are very, very strong view that the major economic impact of COVID-19 and everything that we've seen is going to hit us next year. And of course, this coincides with a time when, as we've touched upon, pilot projects should be starting up and a lot more tangible efforts need to be getting made. So how important is that sense of collaboration? And do you think that it's going to happen? Do you see any pathways between academia, industry and government, perhaps big tech as well? Do you see any particularly strong bridges that will help spur momentum next year?
Yeah, I think it is happening. You've got, certainly in the UK, you've got organisations such as the Catapults that are quite forward-looking. You've got a strategy is being written to align with some of the European strategies and roadmaps that are out there. It's all very easy to write roadmaps and strategy, but you're still going to need real people on the ground to deliver these. Safety is still something that perhaps needs refining here in the UK. We've proved that High Deploy 1 at Keele University is safe, but there's still a bigger picture as we move to 100% hydrogen rather than just 20%. So that needs addressing, but some of that can be done in the background. Let's see the major projects, which big oil and gas companies are starting to put significant billions of pounds into these. They've got great names like Poseidon and Dolphin and various other names around the UK and Gigastack. Let's see, they'll be built in phases, so it's not going to be overnight. And they are mega projects. So let's see. But as they go and hopefully succeed, then that will give a signal globally for another quantum leap. And the figures that you gave at the head of this webinar.
Well, that headline that was coming out of the UAE, that is a quantum leap. I think that's certainly fair to say. Let's shift tack a moment, please, to Tony. Green construction and retrofit solutions are a major conversation in the Middle East, a region that is forever building skylines are ever changing. We all know that. Of course, the way they're being built and how existing buildings are being managed need to change, with one of the current goals to have existing and new buildings being carbon neutral, net zero by 2050, which actually, if you think of every single building out there, it's quite an ambitious target to hit. According to UNEP, the building sector has the potential to make energy savings of 50% or more in 2050, which of course is a huge step towards helping the Paris Agreement. From your perspective, do you think the Middle East is catching up on this vast potential? Obviously, we've got the targets in place. Do you think that those are feeding down to progress on the ground? And what else do you think can be done?
Well, there's just two things I want to say. Firstly, domestic and commercial cooling and heating, cooling in the Middle East is kind of hard nut to crack, and always has been, because the existing housing and commercial stock is already there, and retrofitting is without doubt a hugely expensive thing to do. And I speak this with some kind of knowledge, as the firm I work for is heavily engaged in building and commercial development. So it's very much a go forward plan is the first play. Let me just come back to an overarching issue which hasn't been raised yet, in that the kind of barriers to investability here, because this is what ultimately it's all about. And the barriers to investability for me are twofold. The firstly is the application of a globally applicable carbon price, which ultimately has to make the carrot and the stick work. And let's be under no illusion, there is a carrot and a stick in this play. And the second, which is also equally important, is the establishment of a hydrogen market. Hydrogen, in order to become globally applicable to all of the sectors of heat, cooling, of power, and of transport, these are fundamentally large transitions. And I go back, just forgive me with an anecdote. I saw a picture in 1915, I think it was, in the USA, and it had a street rammed full of horse and carts and one car. The same picture was taken 4 years later with the same street rammed full of cars and one horse and cart. And I guess the moral and the learning there is that energy transitions have happened very quickly, and let's be ready for this. But we have to make the market investable, and that isn't just done by large government telling you what you can and can't do. It's also, or indeed providing subsidy. It requires private investment, and that has to return an investment.
How do you think that conversation in the Middle East has been progressing on the carbon price? How do you think in the Middle East that is going? Obviously, if it's a global price, it's a huge undertaking, and it's a conversation that has been going on for decades, the need to do this. Right. We've had cap and trade systems and carbon taxes arise since, but this idea of a global carbon price remains seemingly stuck in the mud. How do we get it out, and what can the Middle East do to help that momentum? Perhaps a regional pricing ecosystem, but then trying to tie that with other regions and getting the tax right. How would you see that working and making progress on that next year?
Yeah. So for me, this is a COP26 headline issue, that we have to grasp this issue. Let's always take a step back and reflect on why we're entering into this decarbonized energy play. And the reason that why is to arrest global warming. Now, that overall global goal, if you like, can only be achieved ultimately by global agreement, and it will take time, and it's geopolitical. I get all that, but the only way forward is the application of a carbon price. Because if you don't, and if the Middle East is just one beacon of light, then obviously industry will move to where it will necessarily move to where the costs are lowest. So there has to be at least a vision and a goal to... So
do you see that vision and goal being curated in 2021? Like I say, this conversation's been going for decades, and it's really, it's hit the wall now. So for 2021, what's concrete steps, even if it's in terms of building momentum or credibility for a carbon price or building roadmaps? We've already touched on how roadmaps are only useful if they are actually realized, but would that in itself be a useful way for the Middle East also trying to become a knowledge exporter as per its national vision, to go, look, here we are, we've created this document, this is how we propose a regional carbon price, why don't you go to your regions, you follow suit? Is that something that the region can do to really up its game and become a climate forerunner?
I think you speak a lot of sense there, and but let's be under no illusion to the political ramifications of global price of carbon dioxide in 2021. I mean, you and I, we all know that ain't going to happen. It's all about steps along the path, and that's my kind of mantra here. I spend a lot of time talking to folks in Westminster, and it's important to show leadership. It's important to put your money where your mouth is, but it's also important to reflect always, to have a mind to why we're doing this. And we're not doing it. We're doing it because we want to arrest the cataclysmic effects of global warming. That's why we're all doing it.
So going on to another very simple question, such as why do we not have a carbon price yet? Another very simple question, which has an equally complex answer, for none of us have a crystal ball. That question is, what's next? Can you boil your thoughts down, please, each of you, into a few sentences about what we can expect over the next 12 months for the energy transition in the Middle East? Charlie, may I start with you, please?
Yeah, well, I suppose what's next is to see the initial batch of major mega projects get up and running, which will send a signal out. Tony's mentioned the importance of the Glasgow conference, which can perhaps clarify and crystallise some of the thoughts of what I mentioned. I'd also like to see as a third step an engagement with the public. They're going to be asked to pay for this ultimately. I feel as though sometimes experts are happy to speak to each other, but the public are familiar with newsreels, and the Hindenburg springs to mind. So they do need a degree of kind of reassurance that it's the right thing to do. The public do get the climate message. Here in the UK, the kids are on the streets, so it's not something that is unknown to them. But I do think that there's needs a wider public engagement. It's not just a group of experts talking to each other. It needs a wider explanation of what it means. And there's good news as well, certainly for the supply chain, for companies wanting to get involved. You mentioned the figures at the top. Well, that is a good news story for the economy. And I'd love to see an engagement to make it happen with SMEs for people that are not necessarily up at the top level of corporate social responsibility and all the United Nations aspirations, but aware of it's happening, and how do they get involved, and how can they get engaged with the coming hydrogen economy. I'd love to see more of that.
And Dr. Paloek, what should we look out for? What would you say?
It's a difficult question, especially for me, as I'm not an expert in Middle East politics and economy, but what I can certainly say is that the next 12 months will, I mean, you want to start those big projects from scratch. It's just not possible to do it. So, and on the other side, I'm fairly confident that the energy transition towards hydrogen will happen. So what you need to do certainly is to be prepared for that, and you need to, not only have a coalition of companies, that kind of a coalition of the willing, let's say, in place. You need to have, you need to look at where the regulatory gaps are in place. Whether you can, there are sometimes even trivial issues need to be resolved, like. You can invest in car, but then it turns out that the regulations forbid actually to drive a hydrogen-fueled car on roads, because it's not mentioned as one of the fuels in some kind of regulatory act. So you need to go through the regulations that are in place and see whether there are some gaps that present the barriers for actually deploying those projects, and you need to sort of start working on removing those barriers. You need to look at even things like educational system to make sure that when the transition happens, you have the engineers, you have the technicians that can service those segments, do the maintenance, and that you don't have to buy everything from abroad and import the know-how. So all those, let's say, preparatory steps for the economy to be ready, hydrogen ready, let's say, this is certainly something that you can focus, and you don't need the international cooperation, you don't need the COP for that. This, of course, needs to happen, but those are things that you can do on your own, and this is something that you should start doing for sure.
The latter point on education is certainly something that's gaining a lot and has been in recent years in the Middle East, about the need to really ramp up in-country value and reduce the level of imports and so on. So that's it's very topical in the Middle East as well. And Tony, what's your crystal ball telling you? What should we be keeping an eye out for? And a few brief points, please.
So I think ultimately I've got 3 points. The first is that of scale. And the point is there can only be the scale kind of gigawatt level projects in the Middle East, which incorporate export inevitably, so long as there's an import demand for that product. So my scalability issue is the first one, and I think proof of absolute development of a mega project, and I'm going to focus on new on here, which is the opportunity to export ammonia to be deconstructed to hydrogen. There's got to be a market for that. That's the first issue. The second, I'm in absolute agreement with the other speakers. I think we need to accept there is a pathway, and green is the destination, but the pathway to green is not necessarily just green. It's about getting that scale and about getting the market. And the thirdly, I'm agreeing with Charlie. I think ultimately there has it's all very well focusing on the supply side, but we have to look at the demand side as well. And government obligations for demand are actually something which I think we'll start to see. And that's kind of very, very silent at the moment. We only talk about supply side. We also need to look at demand side. So those are my three issues, which actually apply not only to the Middle East, they apply everywhere.
Oh, globally, absolutely, around the world. Just a quick fire question, if I may. I just want a yes or no, please, with a caveat of not sure, if you'd like. So there are three options: yes, no, not sure. And I'll ask you each in turn. And the question is, are we on track with the energy transition to hit the Paris Agreement targets by 2050? Charlie, what do you think?
Well, it's been a difficult year, hasn't it, with COVID?
Yes, no, we're not sure, Charlie.
So it's been a difficult year. I think the energy sector's done better than most in keeping projects. Certainly the major projects seem to be...
This is our rapid fire round, Charlie. It's yes, no, or not sure.
Not sure.
Okay. And Dr. Palawak, what about you? Yes, no, or not sure?
Unfortunately, I think no.
And Tony?
No.
Okay, well, hopefully next time we all speak, it will be a more optimistic outlook. Thank you very much to all of you for your insights. Much appreciated. And that's a wrap. Thank you very much for everyone at GI and if you're in the Middle East. And one more day, and if you're not.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.